set up here. Campbell, let me spin this around so everybody can see the guests that we have.
Okay, there's the
guest. Live and in person.
All right.
Campbell, great to have you here. We've got a couple of microphones. This one is for Facebook Live, and these ones are for internet radio.
That's okay right there?
That'll pick us up.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem
It's
at all.
kind of a little bit like this?
Yeah, it'll pick us up.
It's pretty good?
I think
Okay.
we're good anywhere. I don't know if Sylvia can watch this, but we're a little bit high on our images. I don't know if we can drop that, but we'll start.
Okay.
So I want to welcome everybody back to another edition of the Island Do Call-In program. And I'm really excited this day, maybe for a few days, we've got Campbell Webster. And Campbell is known across the province from a number of different capacities. We've got his book with us here today, which you can see. We may or may not touch on that. Campbell has been supporting the arts community, and he runs a program called Anna Gilbert, which I'm sure many people have seen, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I know Campbell from a few different elements of life, from, our kids play soccer at the same age, but also we're CBC contributors, I guess, in the political broadcast. So maybe what I'll do is I'll hand it over. Campbell, you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, and then I'll talk about what's going to happen today. And we encourage people to call in. The number, again, if you do want to call in, is 902-500-2464. It's really an opportunity for Islanders to have their say. You can have your voice, presented if you've got an issue or a concern or a comment. And we think that important decision makers are listening. I'll hand it over to you, and then I'll fix our camera so we're not looking just at our eyes.
Okay. So I hadn't really thought about introducing myself today, but I don't do that too often.
That's a great.
But if this was like a quick bio, I guess I would say, I was born in Montreal, grew up in Guatemala, lived in Prince Edward Island most of my life, spent a lot of time in Central America, and a lot of time in Switzerland, where my wife is from. And as a vocation, I produced the musical Anna Gilbert, which we license all over the world. I've been producing for 23 years now in Timothy's Coffee Shop. And then I also run a small foundation which is dedicated to the poverty reduction through social justice in Central America and Atlantic Canada. And so we do about $60,000 worth of grants a year in favor of those projects, usually thematically linked projects. So I can talk a bit about some of that later on. It's been a big part of my life, returning to Central America, particularly before my kids were born. For about 14, 15 years, I was translating for human rights delegations during the wars in Central America, for those old enough to remember that, and genocide in Guatemala, and a lot of difficult times where we tried to be, and this foundation tries to be a bit of light in a dark place. So that's what we
That's a pretty different introduction than I expected, because you're more dimensions to you than I anticipated. We're just political commentators.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that social justice kind of vocation that you're involved with, because I wasn't aware of that. And I think it aligns very well with some of the concerns that we've heard from Islanders. So people who have called in had concerns with the cost of food, the compression of their income, and how it doesn't stretch as far as it used to. We've had business people and farmers call in acknowledging the impact of fuel prices and how that compresses their ability to serve Islanders and produce the food that we like to eat. So I think, just as a general, we'll come back. There's a few elements there, Campbell, that we'll touch on. We did, I might just introduce as well, if it's okay. We connected earlier with Joe Burns on a project that you've been involved in, which is kind of compelling, and I had the opportunity to sort of witness that, which was really was great. It was great to see someone like Joe involved. Tell us about that project and how it works, and why you came up with the concept, which is also very unique.
Well, Steve Bruce, who's the outgoing host of Main Street on CBC, he's a buddy of mine. I see him on the squash court quite a bit. And
can he play squash?
Can I?
Can he play squash?
Can he ever?
Okay.
Yeah, and he's sort of top tier on the island as a squash player. But so he's a sort of buddy of mine, and he was taking on the Main Street gig, and one of the things that became apparent was that's a tough gig. He's got 2 hours a day of radio to fill, and so I thought, well, maybe I might have a solution to help fill some of that for you. So I came up with this concept called Common Ground, which was a recurring series. We've done about 6 or 7 of them, 7 or 8 of them so far, where I bring together a couple of people that you might not expect to have common ground and see what we can find. So one episode we had a fundamentalist pastor whose church written belief is that if you're gay, you're destined to hell, and the against gay marriage, and then I got a leader of Peers Alliance who's a gay rights activist, and I put them together and I said, okay, we're not here to fight, boys. We're here to find common ground. So and they didn't. And then in another episode we had a drag queen, Blake Casey, also known as Jajajun maybe, and a professional wrestler, Cowboy Mike Hughes, brought them together, and they were great, found common ground. We had a funny one at Christmas where we had Wayne Lynch playing the Grinch and Paul Allen playing Santa Claus, see if they could find common ground. So we and then this morning, of course, we had you as a former president of the Conservative Party, and then a big NDP activist, my friend Joe Byrne, talking about left and right politics and maybe capitalism and social activism and socialism, and where was the common ground in these two things in the Canadian context in particular. So that's what I'm working on there.
Well, so the ones that I've heard, and I haven't heard the most recent one with Joe and I hope we're able to find some common ground, and we're probably not that far apart as it comes right down to it, but the other ones that I've listened to are really interesting. Interesting to see these diametrically opposed positions come together, and surprisingly, they almost unified at the end of the discussion, which was pretty remarkable.
I have a little theory about that too. I was telling you this morning that if you put people in a room in close physical space, they're inclined, I think, as people are, to try and find a peaceful way forward. And the sort of awkward metaphor I use for that is that if people are driving down the street and have road rage, there's all kinds of people today in this town who will give the finger to people and yell at people through the car, some stranger, and be really aggressive. But if they bumped into that same person on the sidewalk walking, they would probably say, "Excuse me." So it's amazing, but when they're shielded by the big car, they can act like a jerk. So there's something about putting people in physical space close to each other where they just behave a little better, try and find some collegiality.
And we're in close physical.
Well, yeah, we're good here. We're not going to come to
no issues.
No likelihood of coming to blows, I would say. Well, but you never know.
Well, so we might come down to the calls and people have comments.
Yeah.
Looking at this broadcast, and I hate the camera setup, so I'll leave that. Maybe if Sylvia's watching, she can come in and see if we can juggle it and reorient it. But the common ground or uncommon ground, it's really compelling idea. And this is, what time is this broadcast if you want to pick it up? It's on CBC Main Street?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's from 4 to 6, and every day. It just depends on when I do them. It's not really that scheduled, and they just happen every now and then. We haven't done one in a little while, but we will have one, the one we did with you today, that will be on at some point. And so you just kind of have to listen to Main Street, but sometime during that show, they show up every now and then. Plus, most of them, if not all of them, are archived on the CBC Main Street website, so you can hear the old ones if you want.
Very good. Well, if you haven't listened to them, I would encourage you to go to the archive sites on CBC and find them, because they're quite well done, and you found very interesting people to be part of it. So, anything you noticed this week, Campbell, as you observe, news stories that might affect Islanders? And this is kind of what this is about. We talk at a high level on general things. They can be specific to something we see in the legislature or a news story. It could be global. For those who've tuned in before, we start kind of very high level and we drill right down to the local. And we encourage people to call in with your comment, that the discussion kind of pivots based on what people call about. In fact, last week we had Jamie Fox call in, and we had comments on how gas prices are set. He actually gave us a very articulate understanding for how the pricing model works, which is helpful, and some really surprising things on the lack of collaboration across the region, the amount of taxation that goes into the fuel price, which gets into the conversation of should governments be reducing some of the taxes so that it's more affordable for people who rely on fuel. But anything, just a general story or comment or something you saw this past week that kind of caught your attention?
Well, I guess it's a story everybody's talking about. The Gilles Arsenault story is a fascinating story. On one level, I was kind of like, well, this is not some guy who invented the idea of, let's see if I can nudge people to do things for my constituency. That's not a new concept.
Right.
So.
Can we drop it down? Yeah.
So.
Sorry,
that's
we're
all right.
Trying to change. This is one of the problems where we don't have as robust technology as CBC,
Yeah.
so we're adapting. I think that's much better.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we can see each other much clearer. Thank you so much.
No.
Sylvia, for your assistance. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Jules Arsenault story, that kind of continues to evolve and stays topical with the opposition, but there seems to be a lot of tentacles to that story.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't followed it in detail, so I don't know all the tentacles, but the general concept is, do MLAs in these small constituencies try and find ways to encourage people to encourage economic development, whether from the private enterprise or others? Sure, they do it all the time. It doesn't help them get elected. It has often been stated that it's a problem in Prince Edward Island is that you can get elected with 1,000 or 1,200 votes or something. So you can actually engage individual voters one by one with something that might interest them to get elected. And when they're that small, you play a lot of small ball, doing a lot of stuff to win them over, because every vote is actually significant.
And
or family
$100,000 goes a long way in a small constituency.
Yeah, maybe. So, and the bigger question is, was there quid pro quo? Were these rules changed for this money? I guess the person who handed over the money thinks so. I mean, on the other hand, I also feel bad for what a lot of people must be feeling who are caught up in this, because the old tradition, the long tradition of, small constituencies everywhere of doing this kind of thing, give a donation, we'll work on the rules for you, maybe without consequence. It happens fairly low key. Nobody seems to be getting hurt, they don't think. Maybe even people are getting helped. Everybody seems to be getting what they want, they might think, in this situation. And then suddenly there's a list of villains. And if you're one of those villains, when maybe you were just going along with the developer, or maybe run that little organization, and you're not a villain. And then the opposition, to their discredit, I would say, sees a little bit of gristle they can sink their teeth into it.
And that's what politics is, right there.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, not everybody does that, and you don't have to behave that way. So, and there are ways to be in politics that can be quite engaging that aren't that. So, I just feel bad for those people, because there are people who are living private lives, not in the public glare, who, along with thousands and tens of thousands of others who had sought grants or contributions over the years, and always successfully. This was a way to operate. You could carry on in your business, and perhaps didn't hurt people a lot of the time. And then suddenly these guys get picked out of the ether and they're getting knocked around. It's not pleasant.
It's not. If you look at it from the political lens, if you had an NDP candidate in that riding of Evangeline, and they were disadvantaged because of something like this. And the bigger context, as I've been following it, really was the fund misdirected? So I think it might have been a fund that should have went to support, the developer's wetland use, that went instead to the provincial treasury, got redirected to a private sector, not-for-profit. But we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty too much, but I think that raises a whole other...
You're saying, okay, I didn't know this, the $100,000 thing went to the provincial government first?
Well, so I think I don't know the numbers, so 100 is what you see in the media, but I think it might have been multiple payments or less than that. But I think the issue was, it was a developer's request to do environmental remediation of land. They were directed to contribute the funds not to the Department of Environment, but to kind of an unrelated third-party entity that happened to be in the district of the MLA. So I think that's kind of the bigger context, which may raise a flag on, has it happened before, how many times it happened, is it really appropriate? And it continues to be, and the reason we're talking about it continues to be topical in the legislature, at least in afternoon theater, which is question period, because, as you said, the opposition see it as a vehicle to make hay. Now, last week we had Alan Dale in, and Alan's not with us today, but we hope he's coming back. One of the things that Alan said is controlling the narrative of a story, and kind of comes back to the Tylenol issue they had a number of years ago. If you don't get out in front of a story and manage it, it can get away from you. And I think that's probably what's occurred here as well. I think the Premier's tried to be transparent. He's articulated a timeline of what's occurred when and how that kind of worked itself through, but questions remain. And I think that's the context that is a little bit unsettling to many. So, yeah, we don't have to spend too much time. That's a good, it's a topical story. It's not a good story, but it's one that certainly has come up in the media. Another one, which we've had some callers contact us about, was the price of cost of living, which everyone struggles with. The cost of groceries, cost of fuel, as we discussed with the price of oil. Now you, and I've observed this, you're pretty consistent on not being a carbon burning commuter.
Yeah, because I ride my bike.
Right.
And I have an electric car. So.
Right, which is great.
And I walk.
So you don't have to worry about the price of fuel.
Well, you do
Not
feel
directly.
like, you not directly, you do feel a little bit lucky when you drive an electric car, you're on a bike, and this kind of stuff happens, but yeah.
And it is, I don't know when this is going to be resolved. We look at the geopolitical situation. I'm going to you see me from time to time check my phone. We do get comments on Facebook, and I just check it to make sure I'm not missing something. You can comment if you'd like to have something to say, either on our Facebook Live broadcast, put a message, and we'd be happy to connect. We'll probably see it on that screen. Or you can call us in, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. The number again is 902-500-2464. Let's take it back to that conversation when we did the introduction on your humanitarian social justice. Tell me a little bit more about that, and how long has that fund been operating? What are the kind of things that it supports and helps?
Well, as I said, I grew up in Guatemala, and I was directly connected to the violence down there and to the genocide, and our family experienced it, and including in death. So that connects me personally, but that's not what actually engaged me in it necessarily, but it allows me to connect to the people's experience down there. And so what I did over a period of from 1990 up until really like the last time, I think it was 2017. I did it last after my kids were born. So I'd spend a month to 2 months a year.
Still traveling down.
Yeah, translating for different American and Canadian human rights delegations who would be trying to get to the bottom of, or to cast a light on, what was happening, often at the behest of the American government in Guatemala, in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, and more recently in Honduras. So, so there's a great army of us in North America and around the world that would become part of these things. And sometimes they were government, like there was a U.S. citizens connected to the U.S. Congress delegation I translated for some years ago in El Salvador. So it became sort of a vocation, a secondary vocation of mine that I really enjoyed. And it's quite interesting because I remember coming one time back from the north of Guatemala, where I had been in a little town of people called Los Retornados, the returned ones, and these were people who had lived in refugee camps for 100,000 of them just inside the Mexican border.
Okay.
And the reason they had been there for 10 years was because had they stayed in the country, they would have been annihilated, because they were just wiping out all kinds of people they thought might support the left wing. They were wiping out indigenous villages.
So was it a political?
Yeah, it was.
What wasn't it ethnic? It was just purely political.
Well, yeah. For the purposes of this podcast, to try and distill it down to the simplest form, there was a very aggressive government and businesses which controlled the country, made a lot of money out of the country, in a country that was 60% indigenous. It's the largest, it's the only country in the Americas where the majority of the people speak an indigenous language. And what happened was the 2/3 of the land was owned by one company, United Fruit.
Okay.
And most of the land was not used for making food for the people, because it had all been taken by these companies. But it was used for the export of beef and the export of coffee. So that they were a net importer of corn and beans, which is what they eat. So while the people didn't have land, they got $1 a day to live. And then when they started to stand up and say, actually, we think we should be paid more, anybody who unionized, forget about rebel activity, or did anything to say the indigenous people might not need to all starve and could make a few more dollars a day, they started annihilating them and called it communism. So there was one night where there was, in the early 1990s, where there was 423 villages wiped out in a night.
Wow.
Just to, as they said, to drain the lake, so we can find the fish. So 100,000 people leave the country, among many other things happening, to live in refugee camps for 10 years. And then finally with peace accords in the late 1990s, they come back and they're given little towns to live in, and they're called los retornados, the returned ones. So I'm in this little village on behalf of, I think at that point it was Cuso, project we were working on there, that the last 20 kilometers of road that took us to get there took 6 hours, so that's what kind of road it was, deep into the jungle, and just sleeping in like a sort of a work shed they had in this little town.
How old were you then? This is before you had kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd say I'd be 36.
Okay.
And so, you'd wake up in the morning and you'd hear 10,000 screaming voices. They're howler monkeys. That's how the day would start. Remarkable.
That's what woke you up every day.
It was a remarkable sound. They were just screaming in the woods, the loudest mammals in the world. Okay. And in the crowd, they're really loud. And I basically was with them for 2 weeks just to talk about this project, to learn about it, and just me alone. And what's interesting, but also hearing all their stories of family members wiped out, of entire families murdered in the night by the army, and with the full support of the CIA. Bill Clinton actually went to Guatemala and apologized for what he had done to the country.
Because he supported the regime that was doing this, or? Well,
his government had, and Congress did a big report on it and revealed what the CIA was doing. That they were fighting communism, but they were really just in bed with some very large companies making lots of money who called it the fighting of communism. They wanted to keep this underclass of $1 a day people under their thumb.
Right.
So talk a bit about fair trade coffee in a moment on that related to this topic. But anyway, what's interesting, the intersection of my life is, so I spend time, I learn all these stories. They are full of hope at this time. The war has kind of ended. The genocide has come to an end, hopefully. They're still impoverished, but there are projects and there are things emerging.
Is it democracy now?
Well, they have a very good president right now that they did everything they could to not allow him to get elected. He kind of sort of snuck in there.
Okay. That's
a whole other story, but it's the most hopeful government there's ever been in probably 50 years. But that's today. But anyway, so I spend all this time with these people and hear their stories. They're horrific stories, but they're hopeful despite everything. And they're inspiring, and it's fun. And then I come back to Canada. As it turns out, at the time I was managing Lenny Gallant at the time. So I landed in Toronto and went to the Much Music Video Awards, where he was nominated for a video, which is award. So suddenly I'm in this room of fairly rich, mostly white Canadians in the music. Women are in charge of all the spreading of pesticides on the coffee plantations, which is most of the crop down there.
And that's probably not, are they protected? Like, is this something that's...
Because the women tend to not be able to read. So they're because of the sexism and the lack of education system. So because they can't read the warnings on the side of the pesticides, they have no protective gear. It leads to death of their babies, death of them, and everything. So that's that's why you should drink fair trade coffee. But so that's a very simple thing you can think about what goes on. And these are major companies that are doing this. So anyway, you asked about Latin America, and you got an answer.
That is a quite an answer. Now, when I look in the context, again, I kind of know you superficially, and in the depth of your experiences, I can see forming a lot of the things that you've done. And when you mentioned fair trade coffee, you also own Timothy's, because I'm sure you've got fair trade coffee as a product there. It's a fascinating conversation, and this conversation is probably more of a traditional podcast, which we do in exchange, but we do want to invite people to come in and make a call. If you have a question on anything that you've heard, or you've got a question for Campbell or myself, or something that's got your attention this week, again, the number to call in is 902-500-2464. We'd be happy to put you on the air, and we'd love to hear from you. So please call in. So back to where you're at today. So you are kind of a dichotomy of capitalism. I think whether you like it or not, I'll give you that moniker, because you also have produced a pretty successful play, Anna Gilbert, which I'm going to frame you as a capitalist. Now, seeing from your background, I can see where your social conscience and support for people comes from. talk a little bit about Anna Gilbert and how that started, and it's had a successful run. Are you like a decade of production at this point?
Going to our 23rd season.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, and we've licensed it around the world. There was 2 sold-out productions in Australia a couple of years ago, and there's a couple in the U.S. coming up. One in California, and
so somebody licensed this and does it.
Yeah, we own the worldwide rights to it,
Okay.
and so I'll tell you the story of how that came to be in a moment. But and it's to the National Arts Centre. We licensed it to them, Canada's State Theatre, Canada's most important theatre, you might say. About 10 years ago, and it is, after in their 56-year history, it is the best-selling Canadian play ever at the National Arts Centre. It had a sold-out extended run a few years back. So, and it was mostly the people we cast from PEI that they used.
So the cast would migrate with some of these productions.
Well, not usually, because all you're licensing to them is the script, and they make their own production. But they saw it here, and they were so happy with who we had here that they had just hired our people. Because the licensing is they just pay you a royalty, right? But because you own the rights to it, you get that royalty. But how it came to be is interesting. Like many islanders and people who live here, I was fatigued by the commercialization of Anne. And
I used to have a gift shop in Cavendish, so I'm one of those people who probably didn't like selling pigtails.
Well, we all are. A lot of us would be, right? Because as anybody who probably people who live near Kitty Hawk, which is where the Wright brothers were playing, they're probably tired of seeing all the little model biplanes, triplanes sitting around. But so just to give you some context of how good I thought the play was. And I happened to manage Nancy White, one of the writers of Great Islander of CBC fame some years ago, now in her 80s, but extraordinary talent. She was one of the 3 writers of it. I managed her as a singer-songwriter. And I went to the National Theatre School of Canada in playwriting, and where they teach you to be snobs about musical theatre and to look down on it, and not to think much of it, and that the real theatre is Shakespeare and classical straight.
Andrew Lloyd Webber. This is
no, they kind of they're snobs about it, and they teach you to be snobs about it, and I was a snob about it. So in that context, somebody who's fatigued by the commercialization of Anne, who didn't think much of Anne Gable's The Musical as kind of a facile, thin kind of piece of theatre. And my snobbishness from the National Theatre School student. And then my friend Nancy, who I managed, said, "Look, we've written this play," and she brought it to my attention a few times. And they finally decided to do a reading of it at the Confederation Center, where we were actually pitching it to them to do. It was built for them originally, because it uses the same cast,
same sets, probably.
Same sets, same everything. It was a way to get a double dip into returning tourists, of which 2/3 of our tourists are. And so it was actually a solution to them. They then became oddly enough a fierce adversary and tried to stop us and fought us and did things that were clean and things that weren't clean.
They were threatened by this production.
And took some. It was on the front cover of Maclean, so I'm not telling anything new here. But they actually got lawyers to try and stop it, and we had to fight back. And with a simple argument, it's not your business to interfere with somebody else's business. Your business, Confederation Center of the Arts, is to promote the Canadian arts in and outside your building, not only inside it. So there's
not to content. So did you?
So I go to see this workshop. In that context, the snob who looks down on musical theatre that I was, somebody who was fatigued with the commercialization of Anne that I was, and I said to my business partners, I walked out. Well, I don't like the musical theatre. I don't get Anne of Green Gables, and that's about the best thing I've ever seen. So if the competitor doesn't get the rights to this, we will. And they didn't. And so we did. So that's how it starts.
And the rights, is that through the McNeil family, or where does it?
No. So the rights I get from the writers of the play.
Okay.
But they also have a deal in turn with the family. Yeah.
So you're 23 years.
Yeah.
This has been a stable production, and I think now operates every second year, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that's Anne of Green Gables at the Confed Center.
It's in a 2-year sort of.
Not ours. Ours is on every year.
Right, but they take a year off.
Oh, they do. Yeah.
And they've been 50 years or something. So a long run. You're every year, and you're at the Florence Simmons Hall, if I'm not mistaken.
Florence Simmons Performance Hall, at Holland College.
And when you run from what period?
Well, May 5th, so we start rehearsal tomorrow.
Okay.
May 5th until October 26th. So it's actually the longest single play run in Canada. Nobody runs for that long. You'll have Stratford Festival, Shaw Festival, there are theatres that run longer.
Yeah.
but the plays themselves don't run that long, so it's quite a nice contract for an actor. So it's 5.5 months.
It's a beautiful facility as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's running. If you wanted to get tickets, it's not too soon, I'm sure, to buy tickets. Where would you? Are they available?
And Gilbert.com.
Okay.
And with an E in case you've been living under a rock.
Or got hit in the head with a slate board or something.
Yeah.
So andgilbert.com, tickets available now. Long production run. So we're about 30 minutes into the broadcast, and we haven't had a call yet, Campbell. I don't. It's
Somebody's
it's
scared.
Not me, it's
must be me.
No, we have. It depends on the day, of course. But if anyone's listening and they do want to have a chat, ask. We're here to facilitate conversation. We don't have solutions, but we want to give you a voice. So if you do have a comment, question, something you just want us to debate, feel free to give us a call. Again, the number is 902-500-2464, and you'll get to see how rudimentary this technology is. We'll really excite Campbell by holding up a cell phone to the microphone. But we've had some great callers, and encourage you to give us a call. So that's a lot of ground we covered.
Yeah, half an hour, not too bad.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So as a contributor to we've got three primary sectors in PEI: agriculture, fisheries, tourism.
You know what the fourth is?
I don't.
It's fascinating what the fourth is. Aerospace.
I was going to say bioscience, actually, but aerospace.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
All thanks to Slemon Park, mostly. Yeah.
Which, why don't we talk about that as an economic pivot and development of a community? Do you know much about that history, or do you?
I know in broad terms, but
let's throw it out there. See if there's anyone from Summerside that wants to call in. But it was when the Air Force was pulled out, was a cataclysmic sort of disaster for the community of Summerside, which they rallied around, and many leaders sort of brought life back. Great case study. I don't know if you want to speak to that exactly, but do you see any other examples of stranded assets or declining infrastructure that PEI needs another infusion of excitement? A recent one, a little bit different vein, is Mill River, and what's been happening up there is a really crucial economic linchpin of that community, and maybe Western PEI. It's gone through a lot of revitalization with private investment, good or bad, but it's certainly impressive what's occurred, and it really helps to draw people to the region. Any other examples of strategies that you think either have worked, or maybe there's a different social approach to some of these opportunities that could benefit islanders in a different way?
I mean, to sort of answer your question, I'm always intrigued by the fact that there's 170,000 people here, and you consistently run into somebody with a bit of imagination and a new idea and a business I had no idea was anywhere near the place. That's actually functioned quite well and doing really interesting things. There's installed all kinds of them. What happened in Slemon Park is fascinating, and it's not my world, but when you do talk about it, you realize they're doing some pretty interesting things out there, way out here in the sea on a bit of sand, with Pratt and Whitney engines.
Well,
I think
the
it
biggest
is.
companies in the world have facilities here.
Yeah, and they're repairing, I think, helicopter engines or airplane engines and interiors of planes. I think. I mean, it's not a world I know, but it's sort of in conversation you hear this stuff.
Well, even in Charlottetown, there's a company that does, and it spun off actually, I think, from Honeywell, I believe. Could be mistaken on that. But they do small engine repair, and they ship these repaired components all over the globe. Created a great business, a great team of leaders, and they employ a lot of people. So from the ashes of a retraction in Canada's military, which I guess now they're reinvesting in, was born this entirely new industry, which has retrained and transformed the community of Summerside and the people who work and live there. A great success story.
Yeah.
I threw out Mill River as an example. We've seen some attempts with similar investments. I know in Georgetown they tried to get a green space, which I'm not sure really ever achieved its intended potential, nor perhaps could it. But we've got Greenwich. There's some work being done on climate research, which is purely just research. It's pretty monofocused. You've traveled the globe. You're a global citizen. Connections to Scandinavia, connections clearly to South America. You've seen a lot of things. Are there other examples of even social engagements that have supported community? And there's probably more of those in South America with your experience. But yeah, what are progressive things even in Scandinavia that could be applied here?
Switzerland, but close.
Okay, it was in the general
it's an S country
okay.
over there. It's not Swaziland. Either. You know, the thing that I would say, I'm one of the founders of the East Coast Music Awards, and
something I did not know.
and I chaired it for many years, and when the years when I was managing artists, Lenny Gallant and Nancy White and others.
It's hard to believe you're 85.
Yeah, but if you look back before the East Coast Music Awards, and you asked anybody randomly how many recordings they owned of Atlantic Canadians 30 years ago, the answer would be Anne Murray and Rita McNeil, and they might stop there.
Right.
Now, most people who have recordings in our community have quite a lot of. I'm sure you're the same. You probably all kinds of, but your father wouldn't have been the same.
Right.
And so what has happened in the assertion of Atlantic Canadian culture and of the assertion of confidence, really, that came. I would argue came with two things. This hour's 22 minutes in the East Coast Music Awards turned that around. It used to be in Upper Canada. You could tell a Maritimer joke or a Newfie joke. And that changed with This Hour's 22 Minutes and the East Coast Music Awards. This Hour's 22 Minutes changed the nation's view of Newfoundlanders, because now they were not the butt of the jokes, they were the funniest people in the country. Right. And they were doing this show. So, but what changed in Prince Edward Island in terms of economic development was, if you wanted to go to a ceilidh in 1990, you might find one, but it was a community event. Right. And the quality of playing, it could be anybody who had a guitar, so your uncle so-and-so, I'm just going to go play, and ceilidh tonight, $7 includes lunch, would be the sign. Now there's a catalog of ceilidhs, because there's been, also with the ECMA, but also with the reawakening of a cultural tradition that never left in the Canadian community, by the way. It was always completely filled with performers and fiddlers and step dancers. That's gone, never stopped in 300 years. But it's accelerated. So now that there's a catalog of ceilidhs this summer, and every summer, and so you can pick from a few dozen, and they're all superior quality.
Right.
So if you're a tourist coming here, it used to be that those were few and far between, and there weren't even that many theaters. There was the Convent Center was there. So instead of maybe spending too much time on the clever slogan and the brilliant ad campaign that's going to entice people to come someplace because the advertising is so great in tourism, maybe just lean into what you already have and know that it's there, and that's why people will come. If you think about it, if you were here as a tourist, you could imagine never having been here before, and we're sitting down, and you knew at the Brackley Community Center that Cynthia McLeod was going to be playing there, and Richard Wood might be playing there, which he well could on a Wednesday night. These are two great fiddlers in the nation and beyond. But they'll be there, and it will cost you $15. There'll be some great step dancers, or you could go see something else that was maybe an international show. Well, you'd go there, right. And we have a lot of that in a beautiful setting. It is not that the Convent Center is seeking my advice, but I would think that the biggest problem they have, the reason why they can sell 200, 300, 400 seats a lot of the time in a 1,100 seat theater is not because anything they're doing wrong. It's because a million little fish are eating the big fish. Lots of these little authentic shows are all over the place. Right. That's why I always suggested, I think what should be done at a big institution like that is that you make it into a cineplex of theaters. Do another big reno. Have like 7 little theaters of 200 in that building, and it would be like a bazaar of entertainment from the area. And there's a place like that in New York City that does that. Yeah.
Greenwich or someplace, or where?
I don't know where it is, but it's that kind. But we know it mostly in cineplexes, right? Because that was an innovation of a Canadian, right? Okay. Of a great Canadian in the 80s. Well, great Canadian, also a criminal Canadian, but Garth Drabinsky, incredible guy, but also went to jail. Yeah, also involved in theater. That's why he went to jail. Okay. But he came up with that concept and saved cinemas when up until he showed up, there was only, you go to the cinema, be one screen, right. One big room. He said, well, let's have 10 little ones. I think that's what they should do over there, but we'll see.
It's a really good suggestion. It's interesting, as you described, like if you were to travel to another place and it's a similar culture, like maybe Ireland or these communities that have this innate raw talent and not a lot of outlets, but you can go to these little small The Festival of Small Halls, I guess, would be part of that. A little bit more organized. You can track the events.
That's exactly the kind of idea that works, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you could build a whole tourism campaign. Like
Right.
maybe you don't need to be on the NHL billboards. You could possibly just promote the talent that we have within. Well, the other thing it does, and I've got some children that are very committed to the musical industry, it gives young artists an opportunity to connect and hone their skills.
Yeah.
And maybe some will bubble up beyond here, as many have.
Yeah. No, it's a the woman playing Anne in Anna Gilbert this year is a woman named Holly Perry.
Okay.
Extraordinary talent, and she's about 26, 27 years old. And I was talking to her after we gave her the role, and at just after Christmas, in terms of talent, and she's from Tignish.
Okay, I was going to ask if Perry's a pretty common local name.
Yeah, Perry. Yeah, so she's related to Antoinette Perry, the former lieutenant governor. And then her parents, her mother's maiden name, I believe, is Doucette. And I said, "How was Christmas?" She said, "Oh, it was great." I said, "A lot of music?" I said, "There was a lot of musicians you found." "Oh, yeah." She said, she's got 10, 12, 14 uncles and aunts. And I said, "How many players?" "Oh, all of them."
Right.
And I said, "Wow." I said, what was the Christmas party like? A lot of music?" So yeah, we have 3 pianos.
Wow.
And everybody was playing and singing and dancing. So there's her resume, but that's just the community, right?
So my parents are from up that direction.
Are they? Okay, yeah.
And I think the musical gene is sort of just embedded in people up there. It's celebrated. It's a reason to get together, tell stories and play music. And at a time when there weren't these other distractions in life, you could get a community organized in a small place and celebrate that. We've lost that to some extent, but I think you're right. If we can provide the infrastructure to foster that, and again, I look at the commercialization opportunity, which may or may not be the ultimate intent, but giving people the venue and the ability to hone their skill would be great.
If I was marketing to Quebec for the francophone tourists, I would zone right in probably on the Village Musical, which is a place out in Evangeline, where some great minds who've been with us for a while, Albert Arsenault and occasionally Chuck Arsenault and Louise Arsenault.
Chuck went to school with me.
So he's a great buddy of mine. I know Barishwa Daisy also teaches my children at school, and anyway we see each other. And then Albert, Chuck and Albert or Barishwa. So they are occasionally, as with others, driving forces behind their summer productions, and they're working on. Albert's working on a new one this summer, and I went to see one that Albert told me about 3 years ago, and I just went because he told me he'd written it. I saw him in another context, and I said, "Well, let's see what Albert's up to here." And it was about the funniest and most musical thing I have seen in 15, 20 years. It was unreal, and I don't even speak French very well.
But you could capture all the.
It was brilliant. And so they're up to something again this year. So there's my plug for Village Musical. But I would get a bunch of cameras and whatever the French tourism budget is, and I get in there and zone right in on those guys, and make a big deal out of what they're doing and slap it all over Quebec television and see what happens.
So if you're listening from the Department of Tourism of the province, we're giving you some good insights on things to do. If you have a thought, question, thought, perspective, comment on the tourism industry or anything we're talking about, give us a call. We're delighted to have Campbell Webster with us today. Campbell's welcome to come back, and I hope he does return. But we've got a series of guests and hosts that are kind of rolling through on this daily call-in podcast. The number to call, if you do want to have your say on the radio or record it here live, it's 902-500-2464. It's at the bottom of the screen. And we encourage you to give us a call. Let us know what's on your mind, either for this episode or future ones. So that's kind of some things, I guess, that the Department of Tourism could be reflecting on. And a lot of this, like even the Festival of Small Halls, there's some funding for that, but it probably is mostly organic and, driven by committed volunteers. I don't know, is Josh still involved? I don't know if you...
He is, yeah.
So Josh is Josh Ellis. I guess he's the executive director.
Yeah.
Former rugby player.
Okay.
From far up west. I think he's, I don't know how far up west, but he's a talented guy. A very fit guy. I'm sure he still is.
Yeah.
So he's heading that up, organizing, has been for a couple of years. Are there other people in that industry, Campbell, that you've come in contact with that you think do remarkable work to help promote
Well, so this is where I'm a bit of a contrarian, right? Like we have, in the years when Annie Green Gables is not on stage, we have the best-selling play. Last year we had the best-selling play, sold more tickets than any other play east of Toronto.
It's your production.
Annie Gilbert, east of Toronto.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Because,
do you get any celebration for that? Like, that's probably not acknowledged much beyond.
Oh, that's why I tell you about
well,
it.
That's, and we're telling the thousands and thousands listening today. So.
But what's the reason? Is it because the marketing is brilliant? Nope. It's because the product is great. It's because those three writers, Nancy White, Bob Johnson, and Jeff Hockhauser, combined with Lucy Maud Montgomery, sat down and wrote this Lucy Maud Montgomery's act of genius is what it was, and then these three writers. Plays are, they're one part science, one part magic, and the magic you never know. Even the best writers write bad plays, and some not average writers write the occasional good play. They hit the sweet spot with this one. That's what sells our tickets. It's the product. That's what will sell those Kayleys. So I mean, when I managed Lenny Gallant, he always knew, and I always knew that we talk about all kinds of marketing things, and people come snorting around trying to market your stuff,
sure, of course.
and want to give you money to do it. But what sold Lenny Gallant stuff were his songs. Mm-hmm. And the people speak in the end. It's for Annie Gilbert, it's 20,000 individual decisions of those tickets, and they know the show by reputation, or they come back. But it's the product really. It starts and ends there. You got to market sometime, but don't expect good marketing to get people to want to see a play that has an average reputation. And we should never underestimate the power of Ellen Montgomery and Annie Green Gables. There wouldn't be a tourism industry without that novel. There would be something, but not much. And you could never reverse engineer it, but imagine had that novel never been written. Right. What we would have here today. It is still the number one driver of new tourists at about 20%. Number one, 20% of new tourists. Now only 1/3 of tourists are first-time comers, most repeat. But it is so extensive that when my daughter we did half the year in Switzerland and half the year in Canada, in school for 4 years. When she was in grade 6, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, in Switzerland with an English name, but she speaks Swiss German perfectly. And she was at Swiss French school because that's one of the official languages. She goes to the French school here. Okay. So this was the fall term. The teacher didn't know her from anybody else. She had a citizen, and it handed out. The German teacher came in because they would teach German as a second language to the Swiss French people. She walked into the classroom. She handed out 26 copies of Auf Green Gables.
Oh, wow.
In Bern, Switzerland. Okay. And she said, "This is how we're going to learn German. So you're all going to read it." And my daughter, having the confidence and slightly sassy approach she does to life, says,
"Do you know who I am?"
No, she says, "I'm not going to read it." She said, "Well, it's because I've already read it." Yeah. So I'm from Prince Edward Island. Well, she became, to that teacher, the teacher couldn't believe it because the teacher and her 2 parents all taught at that school and were in love with Annie Green Gables, these Swiss French people. They read it to each other at holidays. They'd never even been to Canada. But the fact that they met a girl from Prince Edward Island.
With the spirit of it.
Yeah, maybe. And then so she came home and told me this story and showed me the book in German, which it said in German in the introduction, Annie Green Gables translated from the original Canadian English.
That is great.
And and so then I said to her, "Well, I think we're going to have to really kind of make their day. I'll go back tomorrow and give them a copy of the Annie Gilbert soundtrack and tell them what your father does for a living, and they'll just blow their minds." Right. And it did.
Have you ever published the story? Like
that one?
Your play. Has that ever been published into literary work?
Oh well, you can buy the script. Yeah.
As a book, if you want to pick it up and tackle it.
Well, you see, Annie Gilbert is actually based on novels 2 and 3 that Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote. Yeah. So Annie Green Gables does the first musical. This does Anne of the Island and Anne of Avonlea are the books 2 and 3. Okay. So Act 1 is Anne of the Island and Act 2 is Anne of Avonlea. Almost exactly. I mean, the plot's changed around quite a bit. Things are taken in and added and taken out because that's what you do when you adapt novels to plays. But
is the play consistent from your inception, or do you adapt the delivery every few years? Do you?
There's always different directors, different actors.
Okay. They bring a different style to their
different
delivery.
things to it. Yeah, there can be occasional changes to the script, small things where I've always called it like it's the 23-year workshop. We're always kind of looking, make it a little better.
Interesting, but they don't have TikTok Gilbert's not on a cell phone or anything.
No, nothing. Although there have been some proposals along the way that they should do certain things that I just think just get in the way of, you can have a problem sometimes where new creative departments, two creative heads will be interested in making an artistic statement of their own.
Yeah.
And I always say, this is not the place for that. We'll just take care of this play as it is. We don't need to reinvent it to please creative agendas of individuals.
Yeah.
We just need to take care of the play. So
It's a pretty successful run with a climax. And this year, will you expect big things again for the current season?
yeah, I mean, there's always interesting things happening. Like in about a week, Blickpunkt Musical, which is the #1 German theater magazine in the world,
Okay.
is doing a 4-page spread on Annie Gilbert the musical. They
Wow.
spent months working on it. They've been interviewing people. They've flown here twice, taken a bunch of pictures, and I was talking to them again just a couple of weeks ago. So they started this work last July. So suddenly every theater, it's a trade magazine. So every theater, every artistic director in Germany, Austria, and the German part of Switzerland will be receiving this and it will do. What's going to happen is we're going to translate Annie Gilbert into German because it will lead to productions there because they're making a big deal out of this discovery of this big franchise
So that
in
could lead
Germany.
to opportunities for your play, but also all of PEI as people get exposure to
Well, that's right.
what we have to offer.
There's no better ambassador than Anna Green Gables around the world. I mean, that's just a fact.
Yeah. And after how many 100 and some years, it's still contributing.
It's it has a lot at its core what Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote. Not the least of which you could argue it's the first and greatest Canadian feminist novel.
Which is probably the appeal in Japan, was it, to many of the initial
Absolutely,
readers?
yeah, and in many other places. It's also just worth reflecting on what kind of person Lucy Maud Montgomery must have been, who in the 1890s and 1905 and says, a 20-year-old woman in Cavendish, a farm community where women probably were treated just a little bit above cattle for many people. They certainly weren't things as business leaders. Declares in a town where it takes like half a day to go to Kensington, forget about Charlottetown, that she's going to write an international bestseller, and then does it.
Yes. Yeah.
A woman in Cavendish 1905, like it's almost insane.
Yeah.
But she does it. So talk about the original feminist, and it's really incredible. Right?
And then the benefit of her work that many, including me with my porcelain dolls and porcelain cups and saucers. Yeah.
And it's an interesting business story too, because she writes the novel and it's instantly a bestseller, and it's published first in the U.S. I think maybe it's first in the U.S. and then in Canada.
Okay.
And it's noticed all over the place, and great writers are talking about it the day, and commenting on it, and the publishers seeing the money in it, saying we want another one. Okay. So that's why she ends up having 8. So she says, well, I got another one ready, and so she describes what she's going to do, which is going to be Annie Gilbert coming together and getting married, and the publisher, which the publisher said no. Not going to do that in the first book. You're going to have them not resolve that in the first book. You'll do that in the third book.
Okay.
To which she was quite annoyed by, because what happened was she did what they asked, and people were enormously annoyed that they got the second book hoping for the payoff and they didn't get it. So they had to buy the third one. Yeah.
And so Lucy Maud, did she benefit? I mean, there's been so much explosion in her work much past her lifetime. Did she benefit financially from her contributions? Or did the book really take off in the 40s and 50s?
I mean, actually, I don't know that history, but I think she did. I thought she was pretty wealthy. Yeah.
Well, just a reminder again, the number if you want to call in to talk about anything that's on your mind is 902-500-2464. We're here with Campbell Webster, and it's been a great conversation. We're just kind of all over the place on conversation, which is great. One thing, and another thing, as Steve Jobs would say, that we wanted to bring up is a book that you've recently published. Tell me about that. I'll hold it up just in case people want to see it, but this is a book that Campbell's got some density, much thicker than anything I've ever pulled together. But
so it's not too recent, but for decade and a half or so, I wrote a column every 2 weeks in The Guardian, and so that would be about 350 columns. So then I I asked Jocelyn Lloyd, who's the editor of The Guardian, whether she would select 100 of them for a book, and so that's what they are. They're my columns put together by season, because I tend to reference the seasons I found in the columns.
Yeah.
And it's on things political, things travel, things funny. There's some funny things in there, I think. And if you and they're about 600 words each, so if you are bored, it's over quick.
Yeah. Well, so the image on the front, what does this represent?
So whenever I was writing, so that's where we used to live in South Melville, the South Melville School, and those are two lawn ornaments I bought at that place in Borden that we all see.
Oh, yes, of course.
And
what's the name of that? It's
something, forgot now.
It Lamb's concrete.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's an elf and his dog, and I just had them, and I thought I'll just put them on the side of my shed. So I put them on the side of my shed, and then whenever you see a column in here that begins with the sentence, my favorite couple are an elf and his dog, a basset hound.
That's a reference to this?
Yeah, and it's also a clue that I had no idea what I'm going to write that week, and I'm up against a schedule. So I just write that sentence down first. So about a third of them.
Start with that?
Just start with that and then see what happens.
And would you do another book, Campbell? Would you pull up more?
I got ideas. But not of the columns, but other things. I got other ideas.
Yeah. You're pretty broad. There's again, like an onion. We just start talking about something and we peel another layer. And let's come back just quickly to what you talked about at the first of the program, which was your time in Guatemala. And you mentioned you're a translator. So you're bilingual, and how many languages are you comfortable with?
2.5.
Okay.
English, Spanish, and half French. So.
Okay.
Not really French, but scarcely enough to do certain things. But
well, and you travel a lot to the regions where you get to exercise that.
Yeah.
Probably improve it. As far as South America goes, and lots of change and impact, and I think you mentioned about the U.S. and CIA, and that had been going on maybe before Ronald Reagan, but lots of flare-ups of
for a long time.
Yeah. And still some issues with even Trump recently in Venezuela, but is the region becoming more stable in your observation over decades? Is there a good future path for the continent, or is it always going to be struggling with powers that want more from the people than they can give?
There aren't really, there are some major themes, but from what I know of it, it's a bit like Africa in that there's a lot of countries, and so there's a lot of different stories and a lot of different things happening. So what's happening in Guatemala today is hopeful because of really a regime that got in that the establishment didn't want, that they fought, they tried to get rid of, they tried to throw out. They didn't think they had a chance in the election. They suddenly won it out of nowhere, and so that's hopeful. El Salvador is a police state that is just flat out abusive as a way to control crime, which it has, but it's gruesome what they do to people. But everybody's so terrified that sort of brings crime down. Nicaragua was a very hopeful place, still could be. This is just Central America, but the Sandinista party's been totally gutted and corrupted by two people. And Honduras, which was always the most hopeless, now has had a pretty progressive government. So there's different stories, different places.
You see some change. There's some sparks that you mentioned earlier.
There always have been
some light and darkness that are.
Colombia has a positive, hopeful future. Bolivia does. Others not so much, But you got to go country by country, I think.
And the social justice fund that you kind of help. What are the kind of projects that you might support in those regions?
So when I went to El Salvador to see a project we were supporting one time, I went to a village where there was maybe 100 people lived there, and each morning the kids from age like 4 on up would walk down the side of a hill. It'd take them a half hour to get down there and sort of fight their way back up it with little plastic containers of water from the river, because that's the only way they could get water. And so that's pretty rough. And the water wasn't always clean. Sometimes there was coffee runoff or pollution, and some people would disease or die, and that's what they had. So a small NGO that we supported that brought micro irrigation and potable water systems to these villages. We went to see them because this was being installed, so they would actually have water brought up to them. And the local NGO that we partnered with was there to talk to the village as this was happening, first words came out of their mouth were "Agua es un derecho humano." Water is a human right. And the point of that speech was, do not feel fortunate or tell the neighboring village that you're fortunate because this NGO happens to be available and the money happens to be available for this one village when there's 500 other ones just like it that don't have this solution. That we're here about something much more important than that, to establish an idea in the nation and beyond that this is something you should just have because you're a human being. And so that's kind of at the core of what we do. There's smallish grants, but we're looking for things that can help shift the views of the people, not so much the leaders of the country, but the people themselves to go, no, wait a second, this system has these attributes which contribute to my happiness or my disease and unhappiness or the death of my child or the hope for my child. So that's kind of in our modest way, right? I mean, $60,000 a year, it's about, that's $8,000 each grant.
People that are being affected, and you think about that, really, by our standards, pretty rudimentary.
Yeah.
You don't even consider access to water as you wastewater in a shower or whatever.
Yeah.
But to not have potable water, access to water that's safe for your children, is pretty unbelievable in this day and age. Very interesting. Any other comments you want to make before we close things off? Or
no, I'd say we're about there, eh? That's pretty good. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate coming in today, Campbell, and look forward to hearing the CBC. Hopefully they don't listen to it and decide it's not worthy.
Yeah.
You have to get 2 more people, or at least 1 more.
Yeah.
Really appreciate coming in, Campbell. It was great talking to Campbell Webster today on the Dial-In program. Thank you for those that watch remotely after